the questions and comments from the audience. Well, while you compose your thoughts, I can perhaps ask the first question. You know, I thought it was interesting. I actually remember watching the documentary last year, and I had the same sort of reaction to, I can't remember the woman who said, money doesn't just walk, it doesn't just talk, it shouts, yeah. And I'm wondering, and I immediately thought, actually, the connections with what you had said, Jean, about when you lost I guess the election for city council, and when you said, I guess this was more than 20 years ago, you said, we've given the city over to developers. And I'm wondering if you might want to make a comment about that and share your thoughts on what you felt then, and maybe the trajectory of the city in the last 20 odd years, and if you had any thoughts in relationship to what we just saw.
Well, the city has been given over to developers, and you know, we're in this huge housing crisis, like is evidently happening in Oakland too. There was just recently a report from Canada Mortgage and Housing that said that rents in places, in apartments that are for rent, are 43% higher than rents in apartments that are occupied. So if you're a renter, basically you're screwed in this city. And a lot of those apartments are investor owned. It's just purpose-built rental housing in that study. And there is a lot of development happening. I know the Northeast Falls Creek is going to be developed now more. And there's going to be a lot of condos going in there that hardly anyone can afford. There's a new rezoning plan for East Hastings Street, 4 blocks of East Hastings Streets that could result in 5,000 new expensive rental apartments right next to an area that's really, really poor and desperately needs apartments for over 2,000 homeless people that we have in the city. So, yeah, it's ongoing. The struggle is very ongoing, and there are solutions to it, but we just have to get a good movement going to push for them.
Desi, Pancho, Spencer, I'm wondering if you had any thoughts in terms of the question that I just posed to Jean, but also in relationship to the end of the film. I mean, this is, I guess, it ended with this notion that the development has gone on, and so maybe you can update us in terms of that building and how it's blocked the older mural and the new mural, and perhaps maybe give us a bit of an insight of what developments are happening in Oakland now, and also what's happened during the pandemic. I guess that it's been a crisis here, certainly, and I'm sure it's similar.
It has been ongoing. Yeah, thank you for the question, and you know, again, such an honor to be on this panel with you all. It has been ongoing, and just to give a couple updates from the film, the Malanga Pescador Center is still kind of under threat. COVID was also very challenging for a lot of the artist companies that reside in that center to keep operations going. People have been displaced, but there are most of the companies still reside there and are continuing to teach. In fact, we just partnered with the Malanga Arts Collective and the film. We received a grant in order to bring Oakland high school students into the center to learn from those resident artist groups as part of a 2-year-long grant. So this impact, we're seeing how, again, these narratives can continue to fuel opportunities, and especially for that next generation to learn from these incredible artists that reside there. Similarly to this legacy, we're continuing to try and build momentum around using a film and all the different ways it can kind of support folks. But yeah, the city's changing a lot, and as it is here, and we're seeing that across the country and beyond. There's been some important wins as were chronicled at the end of the film. Community benefit agreements being a really important strategy. I know that's probably also here in Vancouver, but it's just kind of a drop in the bucket compared to what needs to happen in terms of policy change on a wide level. I think that's what you're referring to in terms of movement building. Yeah, that's, Desi might have some more to say. No?
Yeah, I mean, it's like they're gonna only give you as much as you can, as little as they can, you know? So they're like, when we get these community benefits agreements, there's also a law, I think, it's in many different cities in California, which is like the 1% for the arts. So when they build a new development, they pay like a sculptor or a muralist to come in and put art on site. And sometimes that can be foregone and put into, you know, community spaces and stuff like that. But if we don't if we ask for more and we demand more, then we can get more, you know? But if we always frame it in terms of just what we'll accept from them, they're just gonna give us these crumbs every single time. And so, like, it's really important to develop strategies that look outside of the box, you know, like putting up a tent on the train tracks to stop traffic, you know what I mean? And I think that, like, we have to come up with more creative solutions to really demand what we need for our communities throughout the country, particularly our unhoused populations that are right next to these brand new condominiums, right? You know, so.
I'm wondering if you can add to that. I know, again, from the film, one of the people featured suggested that one day he might be displaced, right? That the community that he grew up in will no longer be possible for him to live in. Is there more of that, or less of that? I mean, has that changed at all in the last few years in the sense of affordability in your community?
It hasn't gotten any more affordable.
Yeah.
People are still leaving in droves.
Yeah.
You know.
That's a huge issue here as well.
Yeah, and we, you know, people are moving out to the suburbs and then have these longer commutes. People are moving to entirely different cities. The pandemic kind of changed that a little bit because people realized they didn't need to be in the city centers to work from home, but it hasn't changed the full-on trajectory. And yeah, we just see like a lot of artists being pushed further and further out, even like people that you would think who are successful, like the people that I consider successful as artists in Oakland, not necessarily us, right? But at least financially, right? But they're getting, you know, like some of these printmakers that they make millions of prints, it seems like, and like they're struggling, and I'm like, how is this possible? You know, and so it's like, especially if you're a movement artist and you're not doing just corporate artwork, you know, illustrations for Nike or whatever. If you can, you know, if you're just straight, you know, creating work for the people, you know, it's really difficult. And those folks are moving further and further away from our centers in that regard.
Thank you. Were there any questions from the audience?
Yes. No, it's fine, I can tell. Can you see the mural still? Is there a way to walk and see the mural at our street, or is it completely buried?
Oh, the question was, can you still see the mural? And the original mural that was painted, and no. I mean, it's covered by the new condominium. There's like a couple foot gap between buildings, which is there the other day, and you can look down and kind of get a perspective on the mural. But no, it's obscured. There has been a new mural painted right down a couple blocks from that original site that Desi worked with a team of women of color, muralists in the Bay Area, who painted a 9-story mural on a very important institution called the greenlining, in contrast to redlining policies of greenlining at the National Institute in Oakland. So Just down the street, there's a new mural which pictures many of the same artists and culture keepers on the wall. It's beautiful. It's called Ascendance, and maybe we can find an image to share. It's a very powerful, beautiful project.
I think some of the references are actually taken from the film itself. So it's kind of like the art creating, real life and back and forth. And Spencer is working on like a short about that piece as kind of a follow-up to Alice Street, because it was done like as the George Floyd uprisings were taking place. So that there's like a lot of interesting context to that work.
Is there another question? The mic is coming to you. Thank you.
Where in the downtown east side is the new mural going to be?
So the mural in downtown east side is going on at Main and Hastings. On the Bruce Erickson building? 5,000 square feet, 7 stories. It'll be likely probably the biggest mural in all of Vancouver, likely, once it's complete.
And
Could I just interject here for our friends from California? In Vancouver, we also have a thing where if you have a development that's worth more than a certain amount, you have to put a certain percentage into public art. So one of our but the developer gets to choose the public art. So one of our more notorious examples of public art is a chandelier underneath a bridge where people who are homeless live.
Yeah, that's But that's been really one of the craziest parts about that whole process is like it's completely privatized, like how what is created and it's always like you see them ugly downtown sculptures that nobody gets and like they're just there. That's what's paid for it. It doesn't do anything to reflect the community. It's intentionally done because the corporations don't want to make that connection between themselves and their surroundings. On the off chance that like it could become a lightning rod for them later on.
That kind of raises a question to me. What about taxing the development and funding public arts?
That's what the 1% for the art is. It's just.
But it's privatized.
Well, the developer chooses the artist. If they could put it into a public art pool that's given out by the city, there's like in some cities they will allow, kind of like the offset, but that's also like it ends up still kind of greenwashing the development in its own right, I don't look back down on the artists for taking those jobs, but it's still just a drop in the bucket in terms of and I'm doing a 1% for the art piece in California right now. I'm doing the design, and it's working with the developer to actually do a design that relates back to the community and tells about the history and the cultural diversity of California is like a nightmare.
Yeah, it's the same in Vancouver. If you have a development that's worth more than a certain amount, I forget what it is, you have to pay a certain amount for public art that the developer gets to choose.
Okay, all right. So that chandelier, I think the price tag on that was $4 million. And it was placed in one of the poorest neighborhoods in all of Vancouver. And I remember when they installed it, I joked, actually, us indigenous artists were joking about how we were going to hang our deer from it after our hunting. And I think it might still happen. But I've sat on panels in Metro Vancouver where the developer hires a consulting firm to bring forward proposals for future art. And usually it's like a panel of debutantes. It's like, and the art, they're also debutantes too. And so very seldom is the mix of people chosen to occupy these spaces are coming from the echelon of street art or street artists. It's usually, the process is very gentrified, it's fixed. And so what you end up seeing on the landscape are aesthetics that come from a certain mode of thought or a certain economic background. And so there's a battle on the street, so to speak, for artists here to be seen. We mentioned, that issue about how artists can't even afford to live in the neighborhoods that their work is created in. And I would agree. It's the same for many of us artists. That's a challenge that we have that we're faced with. And so I think there's a lot of global issues here that align with the whole time that I watched the film. And I've seen this film like 5 times now, and because I go back to it all the time, but this is the first time taking it in the cinema. And I sat there and I was bawling, I was sobbing watching some of these really moving images, like the people that were speaking, the dire warnings that the messages and that they were sending about, like dire messages about once something is gone, it's gone. And that to me, that just really hit home to me. And so it hits home because I've seen it, I've experienced it, I see it and I experience it. And so, yeah, it's no wonder we're here on the panel. I mean, again, I think I remember last year after the Zoom was over, and all of us kind of sat in the room together and we're like, should we just sit and talk? Yeah, sure. So we did. And I remember we were just sitting and talking about just, what our thoughts were on the film and things like that. And I'm not surprised that what came of it was another mural or some other, here we are sitting together again. So I'm really glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Is there another question from the audience?
Thank you so much for the movie. Just a simple, easy question, I hope. On the mural that's going to be in the library at KPU Surrey, the preview image shows a woman. I was just wondering who the woman is, what her identity is.
I think that was on. So I can respond to that. So when we were formulating ideas about the mural that's going to go up in the library at KPU, some of the central themes that we wanted to share were Indigenous rights activism, social justice, gentrification, and one of the things that we wanted to focus on were everyday heroes. And given the short span of time that we had to work on it, because we just put this together like 3 or 4 weeks ago, we thought that it would be best to focus on 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 4 central themes. And in Vancouver is also a hotbed of activism, if you haven't noticed. There are some heroes that come from the Indigenous community who have long been respected for their activism. One such figure is a very famous person who just passed away last year. Her name is Kat Norris. And she's from the Liaxin First Nation from Vancouver Island, and she's Coast Salish. And if you've ever been to any rally in Vancouver in the last 20 years, 30 years, chances are it was Kat who was behind organizing it. She was known for traveling around all different parts of Vancouver in her van, handing out food to homeless people, carrying play cards, drums, megaphones, mic and speakers, and if there was any important business that had to do with social justice, you can guarantee that Kat was there. And I also thought that including her in the mural would have been, there was a connection with her because she actually, in the 1960s, she lived in Los Angeles, where she was active with the Black Panthers, and she was also active with the American Indian movement. And she always spoke highly of Angela Davis. And when she returned home from Los Angeles from the 60s and 70s, she basically brought that vibe with her, that energy with her, and we think that if it wasn't for people like her bringing that energy back to this place, that Vancouver likely would not have the same face of activism that it does now. And for a lot of Indigenous artists in Vancouver and across Canada, Kat Norris is credited as being a hero for the people. And so I thought that was an important connection for Desi and Pancho, who were coming from Oakland too. I thought that there was a geographic connection there. And last year, there were several media articles that were written about Kat Norris. And the Georgia Straight did this beautiful front page cover of her with her fist in the air, holding her drum, and she was looking straight up. And to me, it looked like, she looked like the Indigenous Statue of Liberty. I just thought, she just looked, it was so stoic and so iconic. And that was the image that we chose to go with for the mural. That's the story. And we also contacted her family. So prior to the mural being worked on, I contacted her son, Perry, who's also an Indigenous artist. And we asked the family's permission to use her likeness for the mural, and they all agreed. And their only request was, one, make our mom look beautiful. That was the one word they said. And two, make sure you say something nice about our mom. And that was their ask. And so I hope we make her sound nice, yeah. And I hope we make her look beautiful too.
You know, it's cool to be on this panel, and public art and I think documentary film, they're both storytelling, right? And there's a lot of parallels here. And I actually really was interested in the two short films that began the program. Both kind of focus on, activists and important, and in the same way that murals can kind of lift up artists that we're inspired by. I was kind of curious about the two short films, Militant Mother and We Need a New Map, and kind of like why the two of you kind of featured those. I know documentaries take a lot of time, even shorts. What was the inspiration behind kind of like lifting up these artists and activists that you did in those two short films? Is it okay if I ask questions? And then I guess too, Pancho does a lot of that work as well, lifting up artists, lifting up people from the community, and I'd love to also hear your perspective.
So the inspiration was just having, as I mentioned earlier, having known Jean for quite a while, having got to know her better, I guess doing the campaign video as well as doing the rank and file, just always having been inspired. And as I mentioned, when Citizen Minutes did the call, it was a really well-supported and good avenue, I thought, to tell Jean's story. So it was a really obvious fit. Like I said, she's a personal hero. I can still see her. I can still see Eugene talking at Poverty Olympics. And that was a time, I think, where like just thinking back, at least in the circles that I ran in, there's a lot of support for the Olympics. And I was one of the only people who was feeling a little uncomfortable. And then you spoke and I'm like, oh yeah, duh, of course. Thank you for putting it into words for me. And ever since then, I've just really, you're the guiding light and you've inspired so many people. And I know that you're not comfortable with this, and I know that you work with other people and collaborate, and I know that you've spoken about learning as much from those that you work with than they've worked with you, but that's the inspiration. There you go.
Yeah, so my project was also a Citizen Minutes project, as was Teresa's, and they actually didn't take a long time, I will say. We had a very short period of time to do them, so it would have been nice to spend longer on the films. Both of the films, I think, served more time than we had, and certainly are much larger stories. And like Jean is for Teresa, Carolyn Jerome is a real hero to me, and not just Carolyn, but all the mothers that were responsible for building that darn footbridge, which is what really ultimately inspired me. I've been using that bridge for, close to 20 years. And it certainly saved me on many occasions, and witnessing the children travel over that footbridge every day to get to and from school from, a really important neighborhood, the oldest neighborhood of Vancouver, and a large social housing project. And just to think that project was placed, with the tracks between the school that serves the children at the project without anyone considering the people on the ground is just astonishing, and sort of is a perfect example of everything that everyone is talking about tonight. So certainly the work that the women did to have that very simple structure built has been an inspiration to me, and I think is an inspiration to many. So.
Could I just interject something here that I've been thinking? I'm so glad you're doing that mural of Cat. But in the downtown east side, there are a lot of graffiti artists. And just before the last panel that we were all on, I had just been down to the Land Back wall, which had just been painted by mostly folks from the Overdose Prevention Society and Trey Helton, and then there is another guy, Smokey D. So a lot of and they now have a legal graffiti wall, and they do a lot of graffiti in Chinatown, trying to support small Chinatown businesses. But to me, it's so moving. And a lot of the graffiti is about people who have died from poison drugs. And it's made by people who try to save them. So to me, it's really moving. And there was a movie about this that was shown earlier, Love in a Time of Fentanyl. And there's another movie coming about, I haven't seen it, about Smokey D, who goes around alerting people to, doing murals that alert people to poison drugs, that help people search for missing Indigenous women, that memorialize people who have died from poison drugs or other things. So I just think it's so important to acknowledge where that particular art in Vancouver is coming from. It's coming from people who are on the front lines of saving lives, people whose friends die every week. They have memorials every week, and yet they're out there using art to try and keep people alive and to memorialize the ones that haven't made it. Anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Good night, everyone. Terrifying of my microphones, so my apologies. But you know, I express myself visually mostly, and I'm not very good with words. But just so the mural, landback mural, we're just randomly cruising Vancouver with Spencer earlier, and we just got there. And it just kind of hit me big time because it's like, it's very imponent. It's like, it's huge. If you haven't seen it, you have to go. And it's just the mix of the political message, but also the aesthetics of graffiti, and giving urban artists that window to express themselves legally. It's a beautiful thing. Is something that we advocate always, that we need, as an artist, we need outlets, about all for the younger artists that are starting, and all, mostly graffiti artists that are being criminalized and not given the space to properly develop their craft, because what you see now may be just a tag and some ugly scribble in the wall, that may turn into, in the future, may turn into some dope-ass mural. I guess that's the case of Desi, and many other people that I know, many other artists. So it's important to support the young artists, and I always say my motto is like, art is the weapon, and at one point it was just that, art is the weapon, but now that I'm older and I've been thinking a little more, is art is the weapon and the medicine. There is a lot of space to heal through arts. I've seen it with my own eyes. I taught an art class, middle schoolers in a public school in East Oakland, and I can say for first hand how that changed the lives of many of my students and myself, you know, because in fact, how I got into street art was through them, because they start pushing me like, hey Pancho, do you do graffiti? What do you write? I'm like, no, I'm just like paint with brushes in my studio. And they're like, oh, no. So basically, they kind of forced me to grab the spray can and start digging into that path as urban artist, or I don't consider myself a graffiti artist because I don't write my name, but I do believe that art is an important tool for social justice, for bringing people together, as somebody say in the movie, and it's just something beautiful.
I think we have another question. Yeah.
Yeah, Tom? Okay. Two questions about the murals in Vancouver that have been mentioned. When can we expect to see the one at Hastings and Main? And where, I know you gave a name of a building, but I don't know where that is. So what's the sort of cross street for the OPS mural?
Okay, so Main and Hastings. So if you're looking north towards the mountains, it's facing, like the wall facing us is coming from the direction of the mountains. So if you're, where are we? I think we're, that way is north? Yeah. So the mountains are that way. The wall would be there, and that's the direction the mural will be. And production likely is going to start mid-May, like preliminary work, and then it'll go into June, July, August, possibly September, depending on schedules, permits, you name it, all that kind of stuff. And So I should also mention that there are several groups that are piecing all of this together. So historically, there's a festival in East Vancouver called the Heart of the City Festival. Some of you might have heard of it. Yeah. So the folks there that run it, there's a fellow by the name of Terry Hunter. You might know him. So apparently, Kat Norris was the elder in residence for the Heart of the City Festival because of her advocacy in the downtown east side. So that's was important to mention. And so the idea was pitched to include Vancouver Mural Fest as part of this. Now historically, the Heart of the City Festival and Vancouver Mural Fest have been kind of like vinegar and oil, I don't know, whatever that saying is. Because the Mural Fest has been criticized for not being critical about gentrification and the murals that have popped up in parts of Vancouver. And the grassroots organizers in Vancouver's downtown east side have been pushing back, fighting against gentrification. And so there was a bit of a parlay between the two groups to accept the merit of this mural. And so the Alice Street film was also screened at the Heart of the City Festival this past winter. And so there was just, they really, they weren't going to support it had it not had all the right pieces that were sort of lined up with it. And they liked our group. They liked how we were presenting our care for the city. And I sat in one of the meetings, and I remember one of the key elements to allowing the project to move forward from point A to point B to point C was that we approach it with sincerity and authenticity, and that we are not just putting up work for vanity or for vanity's sake, that what we put there actually has a community building component into it, especially given the location of the mural itself, that it's smack dab in the center of the most impoverished, marginalized community in quite possibly all of North America. And that was a very important sort of piece to it in our proposal, and we won them over. Good. We won the neighborhood over, yeah. Thank you. And so, yeah, we're really looking forward to that project. And there's also another artist who's going to be joining that as well, Richard DeTrolt. You might know who he is. Yeah. Who's long been a hero of like a lot of the graffiti art that you see in Vancouver's east side. Richard has been integral in the movement of graffiti art in Vancouver since the 1970s, and he's on the team. So it's going to be like a powerhouse, very powerful mural. And then we also connected with the local land-based indigenous nations, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. And they're pretty excited about it too.
I think we had one more question. Yeah.
Hi, the documentary tonight was amazing, and a large part of it was about how murals like you're making are used to help invoke change and give a message to people in the community. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on how these murals are being co-opted in the gentrification of communities here in Vancouver. For example, I just moved back before I left Vancouver. I was living in a building owned by West Bank, who is responsible for the wonderful spiraling chandelier in Vancouver. And it's in the west end of Vancouver, and the convenience store beside my apartment had hired an Indigenous muralist to come in and produce this wonderful piece of art. And towards the end of my stay in the building where I was living, the West Bank building, the rental agents were using this mural as a reason for the increased rent prices in the building. So when I signed my lease, it was $1,700 for a 500 square foot apartment. And by the time I left, they were citing $3,200 for 497 square feet. And this was for the first and second floor apartments that had no view of the ocean, but a part of their reasoning was that you had access to this beautiful mural. So though you weren't looking out on an alley, you had this beautiful Indigenous mural to look at. So I just was wondering what your thoughts were on this.
Well, obviously I'm appalled. So I think, I mean, I can speak to being a local artist trying to make it. You know, I've been an artist for 29 years, since I was 15. And I've sat in boardrooms and I've sat in alleys. I've done the full spectrum. And I can assure you that the artist who was tasked to doing that mural would not appreciate having their work exploited that way. And I would certainly count on that they have not been paid any royalties for that either. And that that process that is totally exploitative and unacceptable. And so, I mean, I think once you get into that realm when people like that are able to meddle and make money off of people who aren't there to witness it themselves, I think there needs to be measures in place for local artists to address it. And I know one of the challenges that I've seen, and because I know some advocacy, like legal people who do advocacy work on behalf of artists who are facing challenges like that, but they're so few and far between. There's probably only one person in the city in all of Vancouver who can handle that task and advocate on behalf of artists. And it's unfortunate. I don't know what else to say. I don't know what else to say to that, but definitely the fight continues, for sure.
I'm gonna add that, first and foremost, in the United States, we have the Visual Arts Rights Act. And if your work is used without your permission in any form, you have a right to compensation based on your current rates. So you could have done this piece when you were a kid, for $50, and if your compensation is based on what you make now, what the value of your work is now. So, and they've done, we've seen clothing companies like take people's bombing that was done illegally and posted on their clothes, and they've been sued. We've had legal walls, sort of like the Lambeck Wall, but in New York, called 5 Points, where they destroyed a 6-story wraparound block building, which was just covered by historic writers' artwork. Even though the work was done temporarily, we always knew that if we painted there, some other writer was going to come along and cover it up. And it was curated by a couple of artists, originally Is the Wiz and then Mears. And when the developer bought the building and just whitewashed it, they were sued, and there was a lawsuit for several $1 million that was divided among something like 30 artists. So within the United States, there are kind of like some models for what can be done. In California, we have an additional CAPA. I don't know what it stands for. California Artist Protection Act or something like that can also be applied. And it turns out that the Bay Area has one of the premier lawyers who was like a pioneer in taking these cases to the Supreme Court, and she bases her artwork out of the historic Balmy Alley in San Francisco, in the Mission District, which leads me to the other piece, which is that, you know, like the Mission has historically, like, I mean, Oakland's like this now with the gentrification and the arts attracting new residents, but the Mission was kind of like, I mean, it was cultural art for, you know, 24th to 16th, you know, at least 8 blocks, more than that because there's blocks in between it and stuff like that. A whole neighborhood covered in art that was all very culturally based. And at one point, the Mission just kind of flipped, and you know, all of these new boutique shops started moving in, and it became like this cool little hip spot that these dorks could move into, right, and spend hella money. And it's really tricky when, like, one thing that happens is they create this artwork that doesn't reflect back the neighborhood. When, you know, and like all of a sudden, I keep using the Hello Kitty example, like they just come in and slap a Hello Kitty that has nothing to do with the identity of the neighborhood, right? No diss to Hello Kitty lovers, right? But, you know, like, and it's completely like, and that becomes the new visual representative for the neighborhood. Because, you know, you show up in this neighborhood 2 weeks later, and it's like Hello Kitty was always there, because there's this wall that was painted. And you can't really tell that it's recent, you know? And it starts to transform the name. But the trippy part about it is, in Alice Street, it was this, you know, the developers talking about how our mural is telling the history, and that's why we want to build here. And so, like capitalism is just going to do that, you know what I mean? And we have to put in place, you know, neighborhood protections in advance of this. And there's examples. Alice Street's toured, and we've been doing these impact tours for years. And when I was in Chicago, they brought up Englewood, which is everyone's like, you know, that's like the get shot neighborhood, right? That everyone talks about. And that's why everyone's scared of Chicago, is they're really just scared of Englewood. That's where everything's happening, right? But Englewood's actually had this strategy for a long time of like buying up all the empty lots and not letting developers move in. And then slowly from the inside, building up the neighborhood's resources by, you know, adding grocery stores that are affordable and building up community gardens and cultural centers and stuff like that, and building a perimeter so that you can't just come in and develop in this neighborhood because everything's already bought up, but it's owned by the community. Mm-hmm. And so we have to start thinking outside of the box of just like getting something from the developer when they're already developing, you know? Yeah. How do we, like we can create laws that protect music in our community so that they can't, you know, nail the windows shut in the Malanga Center. And the complaints are automatically deaf ears because there's a law that says that they can drum. You know what I mean? So we have to be creative in our solutions around protecting our cultural institutions and our cultural practices in advance. Because it's not working right now to be reactionary.
Hear, hear. I just wanted to add, it's good, I agree with all that. The key is that you have to have affordability along with the art. And what we got in 2014, you said in the movie that the people weren't asked about the plan, the people in the neighborhood at Alice Street weren't asked about the plan. In the downtown east side, we were asked about the plan, but they ended up not agreeing with us, except for one part, which was this part of the downtown east side called the downtown east side Oppenheimer area. It's the area around Oppenheimer Park, has this zoning that requires any housing that's basically covers more than one full lot. It can't be, it has to be 60% social housing and 40% rental. And of the 60% social housing, 30% of that has to be at the welfare shelter rate. So what that's done is it has lowered the property values in that area, so the property has become affordable for nonprofit housing associations who have bought some of the land and are building nonprofit housing with government money. But anyway, you can use zoning to help create affordability, that's all.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program and our time for this evening. So on behalf of KDocs, I want to thank Spencer, Jean, Pancho, Desi, Brandon, Cameron, Carmen, sorry, and Teresa.